Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this overview and scrutiny panel meeting for April. Fire alarm procedures are as follows. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase opposite the lifts in the foyer, assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls while this meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is not being live streamed this evening, but will be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Anybody else intend to film the meeting? So no, no members of the public. I've had no requests to speak under 20.1 and no members of the public. So we move on to item number 1, which is the apologies for absence. I haven't had any. Is Councillor Curry?
Apologies from Councillor Will Scobie.
Apologies from Councillor Scobie, thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Pope.
Sorry, I'm pressing the button and then putting my hand up. I don't know what I'm doing. Item number 5, I've got an interest.
Thanks, Councillor Pope. Okay, item number 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of June. To approve the minutes of the overview and scrutiny panel meeting on the... Sorry, my script's wrong there. On the 17th of June, a copy is attached to the... No, but we've gone completely wrong, haven't we? I'm reading. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I've got it now. It's one. It's yeah, I've got it. It's June there for some reason. Okay, to approve the minutes on the overview and scrutiny panel meeting held on the 10th of March. Copies attached to the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Austin and a seconder. And I presume we've all read them and perused them. Are we all agree? We don't need to give a vote, I think.
Starting
Ready?
the vote in 3, 2, 1. That's agreed. Yeah.
And then we all agree. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 4, which is a review of the overview and scrutiny work panel for 25-26. Quick verbal update on Dreamland. As you know, I went down there personally and hand-delivered an invite to Miss Kemsley, a copy of which I will attach to the minutes. It's there if anybody wants to read it. I've not received any response, surprise, surprise, which is quite sad, really, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure where we go from here. So I'm not sure if any members have any ideas on the way forward as opposed to overview and scrutiny. Councillor Davis?
Could I just confirm, because Sorry, can you hear me? Ah, right. It's all right. I was trying not to shout into it. I will give you all a bit of feedback, a bit of Hendrix. We spent a lot of time down there and went to great lengths to deliver that. Are you saying that we haven't even had the courtesy of I'm not answering your questions?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
I think we need to look at what can be done in terms of the conditions that they operate under then. Because if this council is going to just be brushed aside by a company that has benefited to the tune of millions, and chooses to not adhere to the spirit of its agreements, whatever the law says, there's a spirit to every agreement and a spirit to the law. And I think we need to perhaps encourage this council to look at all avenues of enforcement and to put them under a really tight regime, because these people seem to think they can do whatever they want, and it's about time they learnt they can't.
If you have any, is this working? if you have any suggestions, Councillor Davis, I mean, obviously put them in an email to me. I don't know what we can do with these conditions that you're mentioning, but I mean, I will. It's local plan advisory group tomorrow. I'm going to bring it up at local plan to see how we can try and tighten
That's
up.
what, that's what I'm suggesting.
You yourself on that as well. We can ask Councillor Whitehead if there's anything we can do with the local plan tomorrow to tighten that up. I know that it is protected in the local plan. Maybe it needs more protections in the local plan.
That's the sort of thing I think we need to look at, lateral thinking as to how we can actually, let's say, robustly encourage them to collaborate and work within the community.
Sure. So, anybody else, any suggestions? Councillor Manners?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I still think it should be brought before overview and scrutiny. Certainly we should encourage Sands Heritage to come along to that, but if they choose not to come along, the big question is still, how did we, what were the processes and the failures within TDC that allowed us to enter into an agreement that was so obviously one-sided? What are the failures? What can we learn from that? Because when we're looking at other disposals or leases, the Winter Gardens comes to mind. We're stuffing them out. We're stuffing them with £4 million worth of grant money. What are the strings attached to that? Are we going to be sat? Is the unitary going to be sat looking at this in 10 years' time, making the same observations that we're making about about Sands Heritage and Dreamland? So I think we need to have a fairly meticulous forensic examination of how that agreement came about, what was involved, what risk assessments were done, and to learn from those mistakes and make sure that we don't repeat them.
Councillor Green?
I think we have learned as far as Dreamland, the Winter Gardens is concerned, because we're retaining the freehold, which gives us a lot more sway. But it seems to me that it's national agencies that probably have more sway over Dreamland, and we should try to call on our two MPs to take the issue up.
That's fair. That's a fair comment. I mean, the suggestions I wanted really is where do I go? Where do this panel go to try and get them here in front of us to question them on what they're doing? And if you look at their website now, there's an invitation for people to come and help them to repurpose the scenic railway. So as far as they're concerned, it's the final straw. And all we hear as far as TDC is that we're at the end of the line with it. And are we at the end of the line with trying to encourage them to come here, Councillor Davis?
I'm interested in what you said about their website, because if they're encouraging bodies to get involved with them about the repurposing, let's as a body get involved with them then. They're inviting us to go to them. We're trying to work out ways to get them to us. Let's take it to them and let's put some sort of body there that helps them perhaps... what's the word? Sorry, what's the word they're using? Reimagine it. Well,
reimagination.
Sometimes reimagination might look remarkably like it should have done in the first place, and what they were given the millions for. So maybe that's an opportunity to engage with them. Direct action. No point in asking them nicely. Let's just go and get involved. They want people involved. Let's do it. Form a body and do it.
Councillor Austin.
Thanks, Chair. I support what Councillor Manor says. I think we should be looking at this through scrutiny because it's a major issue for us. And if they don't come, then we need to be publicising the fact that they're not coming, they're not engaging with us, etc. And call their bluff as far as that's concerned. But it's an issue that we need to be dealing with. And thank you very much for going down there personally and whatever. I think that's exactly the right thing to have done. And I'm really disappointed that they haven't engaged at all.
Councillor Wing.
Oops, thank you, Chair. How can you reimagine something? It's a listed structure, so as soon as you touch that listed structure, you've changed the listed structure and you've breached the listing on it. I don't really understand how you can reimagine or redevelop or revisualise something which is listed. A Georgian property is a Georgian property.
I invite you all to look at the website and look at the word in there. They're looking out to the creative quarter of Margate for them to come to them and do whatever I don't know what they want to do with it, personally, I don't know. Perhaps we should give them some ideas, turn it back to a scenic railway. Councillor Manners?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm concerned that we're not just fighting battles that have already been lost. The chief executive, Colin Carmichael, seemed to make it very clear that there were no avenues of action available to us. You've been down there and you've tried, and I think we're all grateful for that you've tried to have a sort of a common sense discussion with them. But the reality, the realpolitik of this is that we have a major investor in the town, an attraction that's very component to our visitor economy. We're looking ahead at the summer season, the number of visitors that brings into the town for hotels, guest houses, restaurants, bars, and all the rest of it is absolutely enormous. It's probably the largest single visitor attraction that we have after our beaches. So I think we do have to swallow our pride and engage with them and work with them to make sure that Dreamland thrives as a visitor attraction. We've dropped the ball by allowing this one-sided disposal, by not having these proper protections in place. And I'll come back to it that I think we should bring that into scrutiny to learn the lessons from that. Whether we've disposed of an asset by way of getting rid of the freehold or on a long lease, it's very much dependent on the terms of the disposal, the terms of the lease. We still don't know whether those protections are in place for the winter gardens, or we have the procedures in place to protect assets like that. My main the 2 points is engage with Dreamland, as distasteful as that might be to some members. They are still important, and learn from the mistake. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else want to speak on that? Okay. There's a couple of other things I wanted to mention. Obviously, the LGR working group, which we spoke about last time, we'll get that set up because there's not a lot happening with that at the moment. Also, next month, Councillor Whitehead's coming, and we're going to talk about homelessness and poverty. And obviously, the meeting after that is June, which is our crime reduction meeting, which I think Chief Inspector, or whatever rank is, Swallow, is coming along to that one. David Green.
So are we making a recommendation about Dreamland?
I'm asking for suggestions.
You've had suggestions.
Yeah, I've took them all in. I'm going to try and engage with them more. I'm going to have one more go at trying to engage with them. I don't want to really give up, but does anyone want to take up Councillor Manner's position at the moment of looking back and trying to find the mistakes, or should we just concentrate on the here and now for now? Councillor Pritchard.
First go on this. I was going to think, is it worth, first of all, having a meeting where we do the here and now, make it clear that we're going to be discussing it whether they turn up or not, and that, give them the opportunity to turn up if they want to come and defend themselves, give their side of it. But if they don't turn up, then we're still going to discuss it. Potentially makes it look bad on them.
we can make it an agenda item on the next agenda. I think, Bob, you were going to do a report. I think if they were going to come, I think you were going to do a report. Is that report available?
Thank you, Chair. Two things. Firstly, obviously there was a petition at Full Council. Full Council agreed to defer the matter to Cabinet, and so there will be a report on the agenda for Cabinet next week. Yeah. Which and the scope of that report very much reflects what was in the petition that went to Full Council, which I think is the right thing to do. Now, clearly, if the panel would like a further report here, then we can prepare a further report. I think it would be really helpful if members of the panel could give an indication of the scope of the report that they want to be presented here. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult as an officer to know exactly what questions you want answered. There's a very long history related to the transactions that have happened for Dreamland over more than a decade. I don't think you're saying you want to look at all of that, but it would be quite helpful for us as officers to know the scope of any questions that you might have.
Hands over. I'll start with Councillor Davis and work across.
I'll just just like to thank Bob for that feedback, and I do think that we're probably pushing it if we try to pin those areas down tonight, because as he correctly said, it's over a prolonged period and there's certain decisions in that that need to be looked at, and we can unravel some of this just without saying, well, what happened over a period of a number of years. So I don't think we're going to be in a position necessarily to make that recommendation tonight, but what I would suggest is that perhaps we go away and bring it back to with our suggestions as to where the actual hot areas of concern are, and that way we're not bogging anybody down with too broad a question, basically, because I think we all know there are certain events that we want the answers to, what went on and how the money changed hands and what the conditions were. That's what this seems to revolve around, and also, of course, and on the terms of the disposal. So I think we all need to take this away a little bit. That's just my input,
okay.
but I don't think we can come up with a meaningful proposal to officers tonight. But do we need to come back as a committee to that, or could we?
I think we'd take the report that's going to Cabinet to here next meeting, and not have an half an hour discussion now about it now. We can have this discussion as agenda item next
and
meeting.
that will help inform, because it may well answer questions.
And I'll take up Councillor Richard one last attempt. We'll invite them and say it's going to be an agenda item, whether you like it or not. Come, whether you like it or not.
Well, that would be my proposal then, to take the report to Cabinet.
We'll bring
we
that
can have
to
a
here.
discussion on that, and then evolve.
And we use that as the basis of our discussion next time. Everybody agree with Councillor Green?
Yeah, I think Councillor Manners does have a point.
Yeah,
we do
I do
need
Yeah.
to recommend to Cabinet that we look at how we can protect ourselves over future disposals. Because it's happened before. It happened over Westcliff Hall in Ramsgate. And we need to seriously look at it.
Yeah.
And we need to recommend to Cabinet that they do that.
Okay, cool. And we've got the leader of the Greens and the leader of the Conservative groups both here. They'll be at Cabinet next week, and I'm sure they can make those points when that report goes to Cabinet. Yeah. Councillor Wade?
I think it is important to have a look. I mean, we've got the Ro-Ro berth, the berth 4 and 5, and the review, the independent monitoring officers review, and maybe that structure applied to this decision making will try and identify what should have been done at that moment in time to protect us going forward. I mean, I think the fact it's a listed structure probably throws an additional spanner into the works, but yeah, I do think I support Councillor Manners.
Yeah.
We've got to find out what we did wrong.
Yeah, and I do apologise, I've got the leader of the Reform Group as well, I didn't say. And then welcome to Councillor Manners for joining our committee. Okay, so we're happy with that. We're happy where we are. We're going to make an agenda item at the next meeting. I'll send one last invite to them, and then Councillor Green.
Sorry, Chair, I still don't know what we're recommending to Cabinet.
But because we're not sending a report to Cabinet, so we have no report to send to Cabinet. You asked that maybe the Cabinet should have some recommendations from us, and I suggested maybe the leaders of the opposition groups can make that point. Well, there's nothing we can send there at the moment because we have no report to send there.
I thought we could make recommendations to Cabinet arising out of this item. Why not?
This is just a work programme we're looking at the moment.
Agreed to bring that Cabinet
Yeah.
report back,
Yeah.
and then we can make further decisions from that point
Yeah,
onwards.
from
when
that
we've got
from
something
next
to
time
read.
when the report's here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, right. Are we there? Right. Okay, so can we note that the work programme for 25-26, please? Okay, moving on to item number 5, which is the TLS KPI Q3 25-26. I call on Sally O'Sullivan to introduce the report.
Thank you. Does that work? Oh, a bit too well. Okay, so tonight I'm bringing you the KPIs for Q3. I'll give you a brief run through of what the report is telling us, and then obviously if there are any questions when I've finished. So for both responsive repairs contracts, they retained a strong performance during Q3. As you would expect for the season, both contracts experienced high demand. Mears continued the trend of high demand from Q2 with 2,805 repairs, whereas BSW experienced a significant 268% increase in repairs from Q2 to Q3. This is usually driven by the seasonal switch on of heating. We know Mears consistently performs well, and this is reflected in their customer satisfaction results, which in Q3 was 91.23%. We also know that BSW prepares well for the Q3 demand and also remains above 90% target for their customer satisfaction in the transactional surveys. What's helped drive BSW's performance is a change in operational delivery. They have got a new parts manager that's introduced a more efficient stock management system for the vans, and this has reduced delay and repeat visits reflected in the PIs for repairs completed in a single visit, which is up at 97% from 91% in Q2. And of course, repairing your boiler in a single visit would also drive satisfaction results. Also, it's pleasing to see that the high satisfaction scores on the transactional surveys are also supported by the tenant satisfaction measures, for which satisfied with repair service in the 25-26 came in at 85.7%, which is a further increase on the previous year, which was 82.7%. For the voids, fewer voids were processed in Q3, and we saw improvement in the average relet time, reduced to 36 days, down from 41 in Q2. We will now start reporting on void properties for our temporary accommodation stock. At this time, the council owned approximately 50 temporary accommodation properties, with a further 40 in the pipeline. Over the next year or so, we're going to increase to 170 temporary accommodation properties. Due to the increase in stock since January, the Tenant and Leaseholder Services has taken full management of the properties into the Housing Management Service. We were already responsible for voids and repairs, so the asset management of the properties, but we now have a small team that will look after the lettings and the housing management. Due to the nature of temporary accommodation, we expect to have increased frequency of void periods, so more voids per property, and also the properties take less time to turn around because the tenants are in them for significantly shorter period of time. It takes around 4 days to complete work required on a temporary accommodation void in comparison to 36 days for a general needs property. For landlord compliance, the dashboard now shows compliance for general needs stock and the temporary accommodation stock. It shows our performance has remained consistent, with the gas safety at 100% and electrical safety at 99.94%. And all communal lifts, water tanks inspections, communal asbestos and FRAs at 100% for all inspections. We keep a close eye on our overdue FRA actions, as we have quite a few, 282 outstanding. As we discuss each quarter, these are mainly due to planned works for which we now have contracts in place which are starting to be mobilised. We also have a new compliance officer which is dedicated to FRA, and this was into fire risk actions. And this was put in place in a recent restructure that we did in September. Since this officer has been in place, this quarter they closed out 177 actions in comparison to 80 in the previous quarter, so they're clearly making a significant difference. Therefore, damp, mould and condensation, we got 122 new cases recorded in Q3, a 114% increase from Q2. We expect this to be the case because of the season, so we ensure that we've got enough resources to cope with the demand. We can also draw on resources from Mears if we need to. Therefore, we can retain good compliance with AWAB's law. We expect demand to peak during the early part of Q4, and therefore we've made sure we continue to have the right amount of resources in place. For planned maintenance, by the end of Q3, we'd spent 55% of our capital budget. We have completed most of our cyclical programmes, and our major works projects are progressing as we would expect. We're continuing to update our stock condition data. To help monitor this, we've introduced a new performance indicator to let us know how many properties have an up-to-date stock condition information that has been obtained with a physical inspection in the last 5 years. As our database is updated, it has made our decent homes data more accurate, and this has meant a reduction in the amount of properties that meet the decent homes standard. As shown in this report, there are 447 decent homes failures, And further work has been done on this since. So an updated figure today would look far better. I did some analysis at the time on the Q3 results, and this showed that 351 of the properties failing decent homes are actually due to insufficient loft insulation. And we know that this is an accurate figure because alongside our gas safety programme, we ask that operative to go up in the loft and measure the amount of insulation that's in there. Once this has been fully updated in the system, it shows anywhere that has less than the recommended 200 mils to be insufficient, and that's what can make the decent homes fail. What we did, though, to check the urgency of this matter was run this data alongside our EPC data, and what we found was that 64% of the failures due to insufficient loft insulation are already at EPCC. So that's 224. We've got 127 at EPCD, 8 at E, 2 at F, and 3 without an EPC. Of those worst affected, 27 of the properties are already on the Social Housing Decarb Fund Wave 3 programme, which we're running. We've finished the first cycle this year, the first phase. We've got phases 2 and 3 happening next year. And anything that is not within the SHDF programme, we are passing over to MERS to top up the insulation, going on a worst first basis to be able to pick up that decent homes compliance. There are a handful of properties with failures due to boilers being over 15 years old or the windows requiring replacements. For boilers, we compare the data with our repairs data, determine if they should be on a boiler replacement programme. And the windows will be surveyed by one of our own surveyors to see if they need to be put on a programme or whether the date needs to be pushed forward because they are in decent condition. We do struggle with budget. And we have more cyclical works to complete than budget we have available, so we have to prioritise the worst first. This is sadly still the legacy lack of investment that we suffered from the East Kent housing days. For the capital budget, we do take out the amount that is put aside for the tower block work, the retrofit and refurbishment programme, because this would show a major underspend because we are unable to continue with significant amount of work that we would like to because of the pending applications which are with the Building Safety Regulator. We are getting on with the works that we can, and we've now installed 95% of the heaters in properties, and 91% of asbestos surveys has been completed in properties as well. You probably have noticed that we've got scaffolding up at Trove and Kennedy, and also going up around Harbour and Stanner as well now. We've taken the external wall insulation off of Trove and Kennedy and starting on Harbour. And the next thing we'll do is to look at the concrete repairs that are required. And for minor concrete repairs, we can be getting on and doing those. Our income dashboard shows a positive trend with arrears currently showing at 2.41%, which is a 0.8% improvement on Q2 and a 0.4% improvement from this time last year. We're also starting to report on TA arrears, and there is a second dashboard in there this quarter which shows all TA properties, temporary accommodation properties. This includes council-owned and third-party owned. And what we will do, though, from quarter four, the quarter just gone, is reduce that down to just the properties that are owned by Thanet. But we will obviously internally continue to monitor the performance arrears on the third-party owned properties also. For antisocial behaviour, we've got 16 new cases of antisocial behaviour opened in quarter 3, showing Margate Town as the antisocial behaviour hotspot. Due to this, all new voids advertised will be advertised at sensitive lets so that we can ensure we create a balanced community. We've started to report on neighbour contact. Is it not working? Have I talked for too long? It wants me to stop. Even the system is bored of me. Is that working? Doesn't like me. Is it?
Yeah, it's working now.
It's quieter. Thanks. Oh, I've lost where I'm up to. Thank you. We've started reporting on neighbour contacts, and this is for low-level nuisance and neighbour disputes. We're working on improved performance breakdowns to break this down to further categories, as we're hoping that the introduction of the good neighbour policy and the pet policy will have a positive impact on these cases. In Q3, we had 120 neighbour contacts. So the final dashboard on here is for consumer standards, and this one shows our journey of compliance to the consumer standards. And it's a little bit different the last quarter, because what I wanted to also show was that we had been called up for an inspection. I'm sure everyone is aware of that by now. We were called up for inspection in December, and since then we've been producing evidence that the regulator has requested. They've given us a scope of the inspection, and they are coming to visit us in about a week's time. We expect to have our outcome in June, and this will give us a rating of C1 to C4. So C1 obviously being the best, with no improvements required, and C4 being the worst, which I think will be okay, I hope. Okay, that's it. Thank you. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Sally. Very comprehensive report. Members, Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Sally. That was music to my ears, actually. It was all good and positive stuff. Thank you. Couple of questions, if I may, just for clarification. The 4 days turnover for temporary accommodation between tenants, or tenants, I suppose, seems quite a long time for somebody that's just been in a property for a short period of time. What happens in that 4 days? How much is it costing us? And surely tenants have an obligation to return the property in the same condition in which they found it. And if it's taking 4 days, is that actually happening? If it's not happening, what are the sanctions that are being put on tenants to ensure that they do, or pay for the costs of doing so? So that was the first thing. The damp thing, obviously that looks like a seasonal problem, with the winter and people close their properties up, and there's not the air circulation. Is there anything more that could be done, in your opinion, to educate tenants the importance of having good ventilation in properties, even during colder weather, to minimise the problems with damp? And finally, is there anything, or what could be done, in your opinion, to attract more smaller independent contractors? Obviously, Mears appear to be doing a good job, but I think we'd all like to see small local businesses getting a share of the money that's being spent by the council. Would self-certification for compliance for smaller companies be an option that could be looked at? Would that work in getting, is it viable for you to actually be able to deal with a handful of pre-approved or self-certified smaller contractors on smaller jobs, that would give where the money's going directly into local businesses, and perhaps offering a bit more flexibility than a larger company? So sorry to ask so many things in one go, but yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. If I don't quite answer the question, it's because I haven't written down everything and I've forgotten what you've asked, so stop me and make sure I get what you want. So the first one you asked was about the temporary accommodation voids, and the 4-day turnaround for you seemed quite a long period of time for a tenant which has not been in there very long, to get another tenant in. So I think, for me, 4 days turnaround feels quite reasonable for a temporary accommodation void. We obviously clear out the property, we give it a deep clean. If there needs to be painting in there, we'll do that. Anything that needs to be mended, we'll do that. This is an average, of course, and some people are in there for a couple of months, some people are in there for 9 months, a year, so the period of time does differ. Some people leave their property absolutely beautiful and perfect. Some people, unfortunately, don't, and we do have issues with people that may be vulnerable, may have addictions that would help them into not leaving the property as we would want. With those, where that happens, we do recharge back for tenant damage or where they've not cleaned it as they should, let's say. If they come into one of our own properties, then we can put that charge against their new tenancy. If the tenant has gone to another property or maybe a private tenancy, then we will try and recover the costs, but we can't always. So that tends to be how we deal with those. Did I answer that? Did I answer that? Good. Okay. Did you want to add anything to that, Ash? Because I know, is that? Yeah. Yeah. The second question you asked was about damp and can more be done to educate tenants to let them know how good it is to ventilate and heat their homes. We do provide a lot of education. We obviously, we have our newsletters, and so as the season comes up, we'll put something in the newsletters for people that we go to do an inspection through the AWAB's law procedure. We educate them, the surveyor will educate them on how to ventilate and heat their home and what the right balance is, and we also leave leaflets that we've developed in line with tenants as well, so that they should be readily accessible by our tenant base. Unfortunately, what we find, it's not always that they don't understand that heating and regulating ventilation is a good thing to do. It's more to do with poverty and thinking that if I open my windows, I'm going to let all my heat out and that's going to cost me more money. So in those cases where we do see that quite a lot, we will refer people to our financial wellbeing team to see if there are further grants that we can access to help people with their heating bill so they can adequately ventilate and heat their properties. Did I capture everything?
Yeah, the ventilation thing is probably the biggest inbox thing that I have as a landlord. But it is essentially 9 times out of 10 in my experience, it is there are practical steps that tenants can take, and obviously if we can encourage them to take those steps, it saves on the damage to the property and the ongoing costs and the void periods and all the other issues that we get. So yeah, I mean, education is probably the only tool. I don't know whether we're able as a council to put any sanction on people who refuse to comply with reasonable requests to ventilate their property, and I guess that's a subjective thing, but I'd hope that there would be at least a little bit of stick as well as carrot in that process. So yeah, that's just an observation on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. And the final question you asked was to do with attracting or using smaller local contractors to carry out our repairs work. This would be quite difficult for us because of the local government procurement regulations that we are bound by. And so we procured Mears as our responsive repairs contractor, where we have other contracts for our planned works. We have to package all of our works together. We can't disaggregate works. We have to make sure they're all packaged in together and then put through the procurement portal. And that quite often doesn't really allow smaller contractors to be able to compete with the larger contractors that will have whole arms to them that will be able to put tenders in. But what we found by having someone like Mears as our main contractor, they do operate with a lot of subcontractors, and the subcontractors that they tend to use will be local contractors, and it also provides a lot of local jobs as well, because they will employ local people to be on their direct labour force also for us.
Councillor Davis. Mr. Blundell would like to comment.
Thank you. Sorry, just in response to the procurement element of it. So Sally's already set out in terms of the procurement framework that we have to follow. There's different rules depending whether it's above or below the threshold that you have to go out. For something like responsive repairs, it's huge. You're talking, it's one of our, I think it is our largest contract that we have. And rightly, you have to ensure you're getting really good value for money. So it goes out through a full competitive process. through a tender process, and everyone is available to bid for that. There's actually, it's just come into force now. There's a local government exclusion of non-commercial considerations England Order 2026 came into action on the 4th of Feb this year. It's a tongue twister. And that effectively is going to allow us for below threshold procurements to exclude large national firms. We've got to work through that. It's a new order, but you can actually prioritise local firms. That's not been allowed since I think the late 70s when regulation came in to prevent local authorities from doing that exact thing. So we've got to work through it, but certainly for any contract of the size that we're looking at with the Mears contract, you've got to go out to full blown. But lower levels, we've got a little bit more flexibility now. In addition to that, I would say we have, Louise might want to comment on this, perhaps not, but the recent procurement around the Ramsgate regeneration schemes, we've taken the decision to go out to open tender rather than using sort of these large national frameworks. Again, that was based on some of the feedback from local suppliers. They find it more accessible. So we are always trying to find ways to do that, but we are, our hands are tied to an element, particularly when we're dealing with really high value procurements.
I'm going to swap the order about of what I'm going to say, because I'm just going to follow up on what Chris has just said. I used to subcontract to one of the predecessors for Mears, and I can assure you that a vast percentage of the work, and I'm going back a few years here, so I'm sure well before anyone in the room, but without local subcontractors, they would have been they couldn't cope with the volume of work. There was enough to keep quite a number of companies like mine quite busy, and we had a number of people working solely on that council work. Where I welcome what Chris has just said is because the procurement system basically created a false tiered system, and the contractor, and I'm not suggesting Mears do this, but that's where the money goes. And the subcontractors locally, we were grateful for the work, but there was no earnings in it. And in fact, one of Mears' predecessors went under while they were the contractor. God knows how they did it, because they were skimming so much off the rest of us. So I think that's really positive in terms of actual support for local traders. And I know that's not what we're sitting here discussing, but it's a byproduct and something that, and however awkward or finicky or costly it may be to look at that system dealing directly with local traders, I think the outcome will be far more effective, because you've got the opportunity to directly manage as well, instead of having to go through this. We would get told something 3 days after about a job 3 days after we'd left it by the time it came through to us, whereas direct access would help. But just a couple of questions. We've talked a lot about temporary accommodation, and I'm probably going to upset Councillor Manners, because I think 4 days is great. However,
Well, that's an Airbnb operator.
but it's not Airbnb, is it? So, and they're not paying £200 a night, are they? Hush my mouth. With regard to temporary accommodation, we've done an awful lot, and I might be asking this question. Oh, actually, Ashley's here. You might be able to answer this. I've been really concerned because in the last 5 days, I've had, 3 really, but certainly 2 definable people that are in the process of speaking to housing because they've become vulnerable. And they're all being told, if you become eligible for temporary accommodation, please be aware it will probably be out of the area. I thought we'd stop that.
So we are still, we haven't, obviously we've committed to purchase 170 units within Thanet. We're only on, I think, how many did you say we'd got? It's 50. We're in the process of buying another sort of 60. We've still not met our target. We are having to place people outside the area at the moment, but we're bringing them back as soon as we can. So it's not, we can't, the people will still be placed outside of Thanet if there's nothing in Thanet available, but we'll get them back as soon as we can. I think we've got 47 outside of Thanet at the moment.
Okay, and again, it's not that I know you're working hard on this. It was just, and I'd said, hang on a minute, let's,
No.
because one of them is particularly distressed because it's a family that just it would fall apart if they were moved out of the
Yeah.
area, you know.
I mean, we're doing all we can to keep people within the area, and it's just the availability of stock. And we're obviously trying to complete. We've got a lot of purchases completing sort of this site, this month. So it's just an ongoing process. We're just trying to.
Okay, well, I'm glad to clarify it because I misunderstood and thought we weren't putting anyone outside.
No,
So
we're
the
still
sooner we
having
can
to.
get to that, though.
Yeah, we've got 47 as of today
Excuse me.
outside of the area. That's gone up because it was 43 last week. So we are still having to place, but we're trying our best.
Let's hope and pray that gets resolved as quickly as possible for all those concerned. And one other quick question. It mentions in the report under responsive repairs, there's a section that talks about MER's annual social value commitment. I just wondered how that was allocated and where the decisions were taken as to how that worked.
So, some of it is already allocated to apprenticeships, and a majority of it is actually allocated directly to us to make the decision on how we spend that, and we tend to spend that in making improvements on our estate, so there's a visible improvement. What we're doing this year is we're going to speak to our tenant and leaseholder group to see where their priorities lie, see what they would like us to do with that social value.
So in effect, if it's credited from MERS as social value, you then basically barter improvements on the estate or whatever. And okay, brilliant. There's just no idea how that works. So thank you, Sally.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sally. It's great to see everything going so very well. Going back to temporary accommodation voids, yes, clearly people will be staying in properties far shorter time, but there will be more of them, there will be more turnaround. So I'm just wondering, will there be a programme of renewal of kitchen, bathrooms and things as we do with our permanent? Will it be the same or? Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sally. Very impressive stats as usual, and so clearly laid out. It's wonderful. Picking up on Councillor Manners' question about how you educate and explain to people, I think I want to say again how good your service is at explaining stuff and putting through newsletters and so on out in language that is run past tenant reps and so on and is accessible. And having received yet another standard response from another team recently that is completely inaccessible to me as a councillor, let alone to a member of the public, I would urge everybody to try and find ways to get rid of jargon in their messaging and explain things in simple language, because actually it helps everybody. It helps you and means that stuff doesn't come back to you again if people haven't understood it. I wanted to pick up something about the temporary accommodation as well, and it actually relates to what we were discussing with Chris and the procurement systems. I'm a big fan of local wealth building and all of that, but obviously it has big implications for staffing if you're going to be managing lots and lots of different suppliers. And I was wondering about that with the temporary accommodation, because you were talking about having had a restructure in the staff team. So it's not directly related to this report actually, but as we increase our temporary accommodation, what will be the implications of that for staff time? How do you see that going? And are there changes in the way that the staff team is going to be configured as a result of that?
Yes, there absolutely will, and that's already been worked into our business plan. Of course, I already have a temporary accommodation manager, which has been with us since January, and they've taken over. They have put new processes in place, and we're obviously working with Ashley's temporary accommodation team to see where their allocations ends and our management begins, so that we can do that seamlessly. As the amount of properties increases, we will be able to take on another member of staff, but we're going to see how it goes for now. Also, there is a high turnover of voids. There's probably, I would say at the minute, 4 times as many voids in the temporary accommodation as we have in our general needs stock. So might need to look at getting another voids inspector as well.
Anybody else?
Could I just add something to that? Thank you. Just to add to what Sally said, when the reports came through for both the permanent housing programme and the temporary accommodation programme, there were included in those business plans amounts of money allocated for new staff. If you look at those two programmes together, at least 400 permanent homes and 170, we're coming up towards 600 effectively, and we started with 3,000. That's a 20% growth in the numbers of properties we're managing. So it's quite a big impact for Sally's team. We made allocations in those business plans for one officer for every 200 in the permanent programme and one officer for every 50 in the temporary accommodation programme, to reflect the fact that temporary accommodation management is more staff intensive, but obviously we'll keep that under review.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you. Another great report. It's so visual that you get the general gist of things without having to pile through document after document. At the antisocial behaviour bit, it does seem as if Ramsgate just takes the edge on Margate, but it's interesting because its noise seems to be the biggest issue in Ramsgate, and I'm wondering whether that relates to the fabric of the build, the type of housing. Is it older stock, so the fabric's less? Or I know there was a problem on Harbour Street where I think there was temporary accommodation going in above some of the flats on Harbour Street, which on both sides of the road, East Cliff and Central Harbour, that were creating a big issue with the type of person that was put into those flats and their inability to sort of behave, shall we say. So it is interesting that it's quite high in Ramsgate and its use of property, but noise seems to be a fairly big issue there. So just wondering whether we've sort of looked at why that is.
We are continuing to develop the how we're analysing the antisocial behaviour, and the neighbourhood contacts is a new thing for us to start looking at and analysing. We started doing that in Q3, and we're building on that. So no, we haven't yet, but I'm going to take what you've said there. I think that's a really good thing to look into, the type of properties that are experiencing noise nuisance, and see if there is a pattern to what is going on there. So I'm going to incorporate that into our Q4 to see if we can find out, see if we can easily match up properties with where the noise nuisance is coming from, to see if there's like you say, if it's an older property that doesn't have sufficient soundproofing. So thank you for that.
Councillor Scrutiny.
Thank you. This is more a pros and cons comment than a question. Based on some of the comments that have been made about Mears just now, Councillor Huxley and I had the opportunity to meet with Mears on site at Trove and Kennedy quite recently. And I mean, obviously we're hearing from them and they're telling us about how much they use local employment rather than bringing people in where they can. And we were generally very encouraged by what they were telling us. And we also discussed the social value commitment and what the work that they would do at the end of the project. Obviously, they couldn't make any decisions or commitments about how they would spend that money. But it just occurs to me that if we, on the one hand, we do want to see local companies used, but actually we could potentially lose or dilute and become less effective with that social commitment, social value commitment. It just occurs to me that there are pros and cons to everything, I think, and yeah, we really do want local employment, but also we want the stability of the social value, I think. So yeah, it's more of a comment than a question, but thank you.
You certainly can.
There was something else. I mean, we've just, I think we're maybe fourth. It's on. I'm not close enough. I think we're probably in the 4th year since we got rid of East Kent housing, and certainly from a councillor point of view, and a 5th year, certainly from a councillor point of view and a resident point of view, I can definitely see there's been a massive change in the way our housing stock is being looked after and managed. Are you actually finding that as we're progressing
through those years, that the early, I mean, you can clearly see it in the gas and electricity testing, that there is no longer a massive problem there. But are you sort of finding that you're being able to clear up some of that period of time when nothing happened or nothing seemed to happen, and that you're being able to invest money in repairs that are sort of less important, if that makes sense? They're less important, but so we're being able to deal with some of the fabric of the building, which isn't major stuff like repairs to roofs and windows. You're being able to move into other stuff which is more decorative. But I mean, from a council and a resident point of view, we definitely see a massive difference, and we see it because we get less moans from our from residents. So there's definitely been a massive, and it's demonstrated here. But I wondered whether that was demonstrated in where we're able to put our money.
Unfortunately, we're not in that realm quite yet. So if you look at the, as I was explaining about the capital spend dashboard, where our planned works dashboard, and that's obviously coupled with our decent homes data, we are, as we've said, we've got quite a few failures of decent homes. And as I talked specifically about the loft insulation, take that as an example, I'm having to spread that programme of work, which is probably about 200 properties, over 2 years, because I can't afford to do all of them in 1 year, with all the other things that I need to afford, like changing kitchen and bathrooms that desperately need it, changing windows that desperately need it, doing roofs that desperately need it. We are still behind, and we're still suffering from that. So we're not at a place where we can really do the nice to haves yet, but we do try and use the social value to do a couple of the nice to haves where we can. Yeah, we are definitely getting there. We're in a much better position than we were. Our cyclical works programme is quite stable now, whereas in the first couple of years we kept discovering and finding things which were emergencies that had to be dealt with immediately. But we're now moving into a phase where we can be much more planned about what we're doing.
Are we all done? Okay, so am I on? If there are no specific recommendations arising, can the panel please note the report? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sally. Okay, item number 6, the Q3 corporate performance report. I'll call on Hannah to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an overview of the Council's corporate performance for Q3. This is the period from the 1st of October to the 31st of December 2025. The Council is currently monitoring 40 corporate performance indicators, 7 on a monthly basis, 18 quarterly, 12 annually and 3 biannually. For each indicator, the expected trend or travel of direction is stated, along with whether the Council is meeting that trend. Where specific targets have been set, these are stated where possible based on the reporting period. Many targets, however, are annual, so therefore performance can't be confirmed until Q4. To support interpretation of the data, a summary has been provided in the final column against each indicator. This provides councillors and the public with a narrative to explain the context for the performance, as the numbers alone won't always tell the full story. Overall, as identified within the report, while recognising there is still much work to be done, this report demonstrates that the Council is making steady progress in many areas. I'd like to draw your attention to a few specific areas. In terms of graffiti, the Council has already far exceeded the annual target of 750, with 1,361 items removed by the end of Q3. The number of beach and coast PSPO interventions this year increased by 500, and 59 fixed penalty notices were issued. In terms of housing, actions to improve living conditions have taken in 305 homes for the year to date, far surpassing the 180 target. We've seen the number of households placed in temporary accommodation reduced, and the number of those placed outside of the district has been falling too. Impressive progress continues to be made with our housing delivery programmes, with the pipeline beyond the 400 target. It's also positive to note the number of households supported by the Council's Sustainable Energy Team this quarter, a significant increase to the previous quarter. Details of all the Council's indicators are contained within the report. The Overview and Scrutiny panel is asked to note the corporate performance for Q3 as set out at Annex 1. And just to say that following the previous scrutiny meeting, we took on board some of the feedback and have amended some of the descriptions to the indicators to try to make it a little bit more meaningful, where we've been able to add in actual figures alongside percentages. We've done that also. That will continue. That's a work in progress, but we absolutely heard that feedback, and that is something that we're trying to do for all of the indicators wherever possible. And the other thing to say is, obviously, I will do my very best to answer questions, but we're lucky to have directors from every area this evening. So if there are any more detailed or technical responses, I'm sure they will be very happy to assist me with those.
Thank you, Hannah. The quality of the report, I mean, everyone has to agree they're first class. Members, questions? Councillor Manus.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Hannah. It's all this good news this evening. It's great. Just a couple of points, please. On the fly tipping, I reported some fly tipping yesterday, in fact, and got a response within a couple of hours that the officer had already visited and had found the culprit's address in the bags, and that action was being taken. So that's all good. What I would like to know, what percentage of those enforcement actions result in a fine? Do we have the numbers on sort of the fine or the penalty income per enforcement action? I mean, that would be a good number to follow. It's not something that, I mean, on what other tools do officers need to be able to investigate fly tipping properly, and support do they need in enforcement action? Because at the end of the day, if you're prepared to dump rubbish on a public street, the only thing that's going to make you wake up is to have somebody slam you very hard in your wallet. And the idea of a £600 fine sounds like a very, very good idea to me. So simply put, what can we do to make sure we get more fines out for people that do fly tip? Similarly, on the PSPO, great, because we all know what problems we get with antisocial behaviour, particularly in the summer on beaches. What percentage of those PSPO penalty notices were actually paid, though? And do we have a recovery process for that? If you could just outline that, that would be helpful. The PCN numbers, the on-road, the penalty charge notices for cars, that came up at council actually last couple of weeks ago. And I was a bit concerned that there were only 2 officers, enforcement officers on duty on a particular date. We know that we've got ongoing issues with the number of enforcement officers. Is that being addressed, I suppose, is one part of the question here. But do we have data on the amount of parking revenue that's being collected from people putting money in the machines or paying on Ringo and what have you? Because one of the reasons for the PCN numbers going up might just well be that nobody's buying a ticket anymore. Perhaps too many people have figured out that the chances of getting the ticket are not that great, and they're playing the averages on that. So some data on the parking on the revenue versus the penalty charge notices would be helpful. And finally, we've not had any real problems in my ward with bins until the last couple of weeks. Has something changed in the last few weeks, apart from the weather, that we're now seeing a lot more overflowing unemptied bins, public bins? Is that, and what are we can we look forward to seeing in the report for this quarter? Thank you.
Mr. Humber.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Manus. So there's a few things there, starting with fly tipping and the percentage of enforcement actions. Obviously, the figures here are the actions taken. What it doesn't tell you, and you're quite right, it doesn't tell you how many actually pay. I haven't got that information here, but it's something that I can find and share. Similar for the PSPO breaches, obviously it shows the number of FPNs that were issued under the PSPO on the beaches last year. Again, I haven't got that figure as to how many have been paid, but it's something that we can follow up with. And if people don't pay the first time, then obviously there's a process that we need to go through in terms of recovery to make sure that, as you say, it is a proper deterrent for those various things. Coming on to PCNs, and yes, I remember the question to council, and the response was around the number of staff that we have, and we're always having this issue because it is a tough job, and we're always having this issue with recruitment and trying to retain a suitable number of staff. Sometimes more are rotated on than others. Sometimes some are on a rest day. I think you asked for data on a couple of days. One of those days was a Sunday, and there weren't many people on that day, and I think that's what you're referring to. But we are, recruiting a lot of the time to get staff in. We've got staff that do stay for, that have stayed for a long time, that that are invested in the job. Yeah. I may know who you're talking about, and yes, we've got. I mean, I think we've got a really good team, but as I say, it's a tough job, and there is a fairly high churn rate, higher than in other areas, perhaps. I think parking revenue-wise, that's something that's more of a sort of an accounts question in terms of how much how much is made and whether it's meeting targets. And I think that's something again that we can highlight in the accounts in terms of what the target is, where we are with it.
Thanks, Mike. If I could just come back on the parking revenue versus the fixed penalty the penalty charge notices. It's really just to be sure that the increase in PCNs is a result of better admin or better operations management from the council, or whether it's just because nobody's bothering to buy tickets. And obviously, you want, in a perfect world, you want no penalty charge notices because everyone's bought a ticket and everyone's parked legally. So that's why I'm asking that data is what extent is this increase in the number of PCNs a result of what we're doing right, and how much is a result of drivers' behaviour and not perhaps not buying tickets.
Yeah, I think I get the point. I understand the point, and I think that's something that we can, if we perhaps pull some of the account information, I'm happy to share that and see. But I think, in answer, I think it's about us doing things right and having a higher number of staff out doing that enforcement role on parking. I think the last point you raised was about bins and about street bins or coastal bins being emptied, and I think it's worth saying that we know that that we've had a few problems recently with collections. There've been some overflowing bins recently, not just in Kingsgate, in other areas. There's an increase in seasonal demand, and we've had issues a little bit with staff sickness, a little bit with vehicle reliability issues, and I think those combination of factors have created a temporary problem, and it is temporary. I know we've got on the rota for this weekend more staff out specifically for that purpose, because we are in April now. The sun's coming out, there are more people around the coastline. We'll be soon going into full summer mode, so we'll have more bins out, more staff out or more crews out collecting, more staff out beach cleaning. But we're just at that transition point, I think, and we've just had some temporary problems that I know I'm working with Matt, and Matt Elmer, the head of cleansing, is working very hard to overcome those, so that we head into the summer in the right way.
Thank you for that. One absolute last point. When do the HR Go team come on board for the seasonal beach cleaning?
Yeah. So we start the season for it's agency and it's Thanet Council core staff, but we start that season from Easter, really. The most, it ramps up, so the most staff are on over the peak season, which is the summer holiday period. But there are normally more staff on from Easter or certainly from the May Day bank holiday when the weather gets really hot. But it's also a case of balancing the staff with the need. You know, if the weather's bad and there aren't many people around, what we don't want to do is over-resource, because that costs money, and we need to be careful about how much money we spend and make sure that we're putting the resources where they're needed and when they're needed. So, but certainly. So that's, I mean, at this point is when it starts to build up, and some of the issues we've seen with litter bin emptying is probably a result of the sun coming out. Suddenly we're getting a lot more waste, and we need to make sure we keep pace with that with emptying bins and having the right number of resources on it. Certainly by May we'll have more resources out on the beach. If it was really hot at Easter, we would make sure we have the right numbers on for the beaches then.
Thanks, Mike. So we have a similar resource this month as we did in the same time period last year. Has the resource increased or decreased for beach cleaning and for bin emptying from 2026 for March, April 2026 and March, April 2025? Do we have a similar? What's the difference in the resource for the two different periods?
No, I think it's similar. Yeah, I think the answer is it's similar. I don't think we're doing anything different in terms of last year to this year.
Councillor Scrutiny.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to the PCNs. I represent a ward that is on the beach or has the beach edge. Thinking about when our civil enforcement officers are available. Now, obviously we heard the question saying on a Sunday there were only 2 officers on duty, and understand that. And I know that for operational reasons that we're not told who's working in what area, because we can alert people to move their cars and we don't want that. But if you are able to tell me, on an average day, or perhaps actually of an average evening, how many officers are we likely to have out on the streets, given that those 2 were covering the whole of Thanet? And until what time of night do they work? Because one of the things that I'm already getting this early in the season is overnight camping inquiries. Now, if our staff finish at 6 o'clock, then they're not going to catch anyone camping overnight where we've got no overnight camping. I'm choosing daft times there a little bit, but is there a sort of a particular time at which, and if you don't want to answer that question live for the same operational reasons, I fully appreciate it, but it would be helpful to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the answer, I mean, if we were fully resourced, we'd have about 10 officers, 10 civil enforcement officers, but they're not all on at any one time, because of course they need to have rest days. We've got annual leave, we've got things like that to cater for. It's difficult to say on an average day, because there are days when there are more on than others. And that day that Councillor Manners asked about, there were only 2 on that at that period in time. But the numbers are between 2 and nearly the full deployment, so 8, 9, that sort of number. So they work variable shifts. So some are on earlies, some are on lates, and that varies day on day. Again, for the sort of reasons you've suggested, we don't advertise exactly when civil enforcement officers are working for fairly obvious reasons. But they have late, days when they're on late, so they're working till 8, 9 o'clock at night. When there's light and they're able to do that, and sometimes they're on earlies. We have we have a whole schedule working around schools when schools are starting in the morning and when schools are finishing, so that we're working on those, because this is about safety and trying to stop parking in inappropriate places where it's dangerous. So we have various schedules that they follow around all the schools in Thanet. So there's various things they do various times, and the deployment changes based on the task that they're doing.
having been ticketed at 8:01 in the morning down on Broadstairs Seafront when I lived there on a single yellow line, I know that they do start at 8 o'clock in the morning at least. That wasn't recently, that was a few years ago. I was more interested in when they finish, because it's if I could have that maybe later, because it's, this is the problem. People know that the later they turn up, the more chance they have of not getting caught overnight, shall we say.
Yeah. So I'm happy to have a conversation about that. But as you know, we have areas where overnight parking is restricted. We have to be able to enforce that. We have to have late shifts to be able to enforce that. So those things do occur.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Hannah. It's generally a very encouraging picture. It's really nice to be able to see it in such clear terms. I wanted to ask a question that I've been meaning to ask in previous iterations of this and never got round to doing, which is about the choice of the measures that we're looking at and when and how we're refreshing those. I'm particularly concerned about the Thriving Place section, because it feels to me like there's so much else that we do, and I'm looking at Louise particularly, at all the stuff that happens in Regeneration, but all sorts of other things that help to create a thriving place. And we've chosen some very particular indicators that are about our assets and so on. So I'm thinking about, the Voluntary Sector Forum, for example, is a real step forward in terms of creating a thriving place and supporting our community. Are there ways that we can incorporate other measures as we go along, or is this it now until we're in the unitary? I've lost track of where we are with that.
Thank you. It's a great question. And the way that our corporate performance framework exists means that you absolutely, as a scrutiny panel, can make recommendations to Cabinet to consider other areas. That the point being that we had to have a baseline, we had to have a starting point. It had to be data that directly linked back to the corporate plan, and it also had to be data that was reasonably achievable to be able to present and to provide it in a meaningful way and on a regular basis. So within those parameters, this is therefore the set of indicators that have been brought forwards. I think we recognise under Thriving Place that it appears to give less of a kind of a fulsome picture. The idea being for that is that the regeneration programmes have got an awful lot of kind of scrutiny processes and monitoring mechanisms and reporting on a very regular basis. What we didn't want to do was then extract data that's then repeated in there. But actually, yes, if there are other indicators that you feel that we could and should be capturing, then absolutely that is something that could be recommended to Cabinet. We can then go away and see what is possible to collate for you. But the idea being that it's, although we've got this formally approved from Cabinet initially and kind of shared with scrutiny after Cabinet approved the 40 indicators, the idea is absolutely that if the new data becomes available or there's opportunities for us to share more, we absolutely should be doing that, because this is part of our commitment to be more transparent. The other thing just to say is that there will be, coming through all of the committee programmes, a formal update on the corporate plan as well, which will then go in much more thorough detail. The very specific commitments and the projects that were listed within that corporate plan, there will be a progress update given, which will eventually make its way to full council. And just referencing your point with LGR, that on the basis that obviously from the 1st of April 2028, Thanet Council will be no more, then we're kind of, the parameters are slightly different. So it might be that the scope and the scale of some of the things that we were hoping to do has to be kind of pulled back, taken out potentially, new things added in, that kind of thing. But yeah, the idea is that this is intended to be a little, relatively flexible. So please do, if you have suggestions, give them. Thank you.
Councillor Pope.
Thank you. I've got a question about the long-term empty homes. I can't remember when it came into force or if it has yet, but there was increased council tax for long-term empty homes, and I was just wondering, has that had an impact yet, or when we might expect to find that having an impact?
Do you want me to? I can't comment on the data in terms of what has happened in homes, but the policy is very much in place. Has been for a number of years, the empty homes one. It's the second homes one that came in more recently. The empty homes one has been for a number of years, but more recently we've been able to increase the premium. So as homes are empty for a longer period of time, the rate of council tax they have to pay increases, going from 100% premium all the way up to 400, I believe it is, or maybe 300% after 10 years. But yeah, I don't know if Bob and Ash can comment on the actual the data in terms of the number of homes.
I'm not sure I can add much to the council tax banding answer, but you know, one of the issues that we do have is that sometimes properties aren't even on the council tax register because of the condition they're in. So, and the team do struggle with that. So, you know, properties that are particularly poor and not in a habitable condition wouldn't have a council tax liability. And you know, so the team do try and target those, but of course they are the most complicated cases. And quite often the cost of bringing them back into use is very high. So, you know, it's always a bit of a trade-off for the officers to know whether to kind of target things that are easy to bring back into use and maybe are paying a council tax premium, or target properties that have been empty or uninhabitable, maybe haven't got a kitchen or bathroom installed, and, you know, make something that is a really significant gain for the district and the environment. So, you know, but obviously the resources in that team are quite limited. So you know, there is only so many that they can focus on at any one time.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, sorry, going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but in terms of, so Bob rightly said some houses don't pay council tax at all. That's if they're so derelict, they're classed as uninhabitable, so they won't have bathrooms and kitchens in there. That decision is actually taken by the valuation office, so we don't get to take that decision as to whether the property is classed as being outside of council tax, but the work of Bob and Ash's team can help contribute bringing that property back into use and then into our council tax base. But yeah, so if it's just empty and not furnished for a long period of time, it can get charged these premiums, but if it's been gutted and someone couldn't move in and live in it, they don't pay any council tax at all.
We're actually out to advert at the moment for another empty property officer, so that will help our senior empty property officer to ramp up these numbers and do a bit more investigations.
Excellent. Councillor Wing.
Thank you. A great report. I think I'm going to concentrate on the public realm because that seems to be the one thing that most of our residents moan about or have concerns about. They want their community to look okay. I think with the PCNs and traffic parked, cars parked in places they shouldn't be, does impact on the public realm. And I don't think we have a culture of actually getting parking tickets, and I support Councillor Manners behind. I think you can park your car and you can almost guarantee that you're not going to get a ticket, and it's how we overcome that culture. When I go to my mum's in Walthamstow, my tyre is up a little bit over the white line, and a little person comes flying round on a scooter, and I get a ticket. So, you know, you're going to get a ticket if you park there without a ticket. So I think that's the first thing that we need to try and address is the fact that we don't have this culture, because you're unlikely to get a ticket. It'd also be interesting to have the data on where the most tickets are given, because then we can identify hotspots. So in our ward, a hotspot would be the town centre after 6 o'clock. I walked up there the other night and there must have been 30 cars parked on Harbour Street. Further up, there's signs all over saying no parking at any time. Nobody's giving a damn, really. So, and I do know the parking enforcement team, when I report things, they do create a hotspot and they do go out there, and I do see an improvement. And I know we don't have enough staff. We could probably do with 50 and we'd still have a problem in some places. And I know there's somebody on my street who gets a ticket every week and doesn't pay them. He throws them on the floor. So I don't know how that happens, but I think he's doing something wrong rather than we're doing something wrong because we're issuing the ticket. So it would be quite interesting to have the data on where the parking people are going. So is there a big issue, more tickets handed out in town centres or in rural areas? That would be quite interesting. Fly tipping, I can't do anything but praise the our fly tipping team. Street scene have been absolutely magnificent, particularly on Cornhill, where a great deal of officer time and councillor time and residents' time was wasted, and now we have a solved situation. And I find that when I do report to street scene, seagull bags hung out or stuff being fly tipped, it does get removed. So I think they've got a constant role, but they're doing a really great job. Graffiti, another big positive in our ward. We've reported it and worked with the graffiti team. Lots of that's been removed. There has been a problem with the bins. There was a massive problem. I've seen an improvement over this week, but there were bins all over the place overflowing. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but hopefully that will be addressed. We do still have a massive camper van issue, particularly on the Western Undercliff, but I think there's issues on the East Cliff as well. What I find difficult is if these were travellers down on the Western Undercliff, because some of these camper vans have been there 12 months and haven't moved, they would have been enforced. And I'm almost tempted to report it to the traveller team at KCC, because they helped us remove a caravan from Grove Road that had been there 3 years, I think that had been there, but they eventually came out with the Sheriff of Kent to move it. So, I've got a camper van. I can go to Folkestone, I can go to Dover, and I think a simple thing on the Western Undercliff or on the East Cliff would be to put some parking charges in there, not to penalise local people to go to the beach during the day, but if you want to stay on the Western Undercliff from 6 o'clock onwards until 6 o'clock in the morning, then you're going to have to pay. So I think we definitely need to look at, on the coastal area, introducing some paid parking, which isn't paid parking during the day, but it's paid parking overnight to stop the whole permanent situation of camper vans. Recycling, it started last week. Mine wasn't collected, but I'm sure it will be addressed this week, unfortunately. But I wish we'd use some councillor knowledge, because the Paragon is covered in recycling that wasn't collected on Monday, and it's in plastic bags. They really, the advice should have been for the people on the Paragon is use your seagull bag to put your recycling bags in, because we can't have empty plastic bags on a seafront when it's windy. It's just going to end up all over the place. I did keep logging onto the system, and I think sometimes the system needs to be given that detailed information about if you live in a difficult area. So the Paragon's on the seafront, same on your area up there. We can't have wheelie bins. We have to have the clear plastic bags, but they really do need to go inside the seagull bag. And I'm not sure whether that's allowed, because it doesn't say on the system, but that would save that problem. And that hasn't happened. The one thing I'd like to add to this is dog fouling. I mean, we have a huge issue. It's endemic across the Isle, I think. Everywhere I go, I'm looking for dog poo. And I think we are one of the worst areas I've visited, I'm afraid, and I'm a dog owner. I wish if this could be added to the list, and we have a massive push, because it's all of our responsibility. You know, it's not council officers or council workers leaving dog poo. It's dog owners. So I just wish even if we could get some signage going, that would help, and maybe some promotion. It might also be interesting to cost some of these. So when I report a bit of fly tipping, how much does it cost us to send a team out to remove that fly tipping? And we could, categorise that cost and start saying that, it costs us £100 to remove that bit of fly tipping that somebody's left somewhere. Business rates. It would be quite interesting to look at not just business rate collection. I know there's 2 or 3 businesses that have failed in Ramsgate because of the increase in business rates. So have we got data that relates to businesses that have shut down specifically because of the business rate increase, which again is nothing to do with us, it's government policy, but it's our town centres that are being impacted. Sorry, I've gone on quite a lot, haven't I? But I mean, overall, there's so many positives. The fly tipping, the graffiti. I think the bins is a temporary situation, because we've seen an improvement this week. I'm sure the recycling, as we get going, it will be. And there are, a significant number of residents who don't want to look at the information. It's up to us to try and help educate people. Thank you.
Thank
I'm going to say I don't suppose we probably have time or the ability to answer everything individually. I've certainly made a note of absolutely everything, and I'm sure that we'll swap notes, and I'm sure that Mike will want to speak after me. But in relation to anything where we can do more promotion, provide more information, add more data, absolutely we will do our best to see what we hold and what's possible and try to include that. What I will just say, for the benefit of any members of the public that watch this recording tomorrow and that aren't pouring through the report, in relation to the comment about there being a culture of not giving out parking tickets, the data does say for Q3 there were 6,913 PCNs that were handed out. So I think I just want to provide that context. It's not that it's not happening, but I think to question, to challenge, to understand where and how, I think that's entirely reasonable. But I thought it was important to kind of come back on that. But yeah, Mike, I didn't know whether you wanted to add anything further.
Thanks. I was going to make that point. I mean, the Q1 6,900, Q2 6,100, Q3 6,900. We are issuing. We're definitely issuing. I understand that there's a lot of cars, there's a lot of parking, and of course our officers aren't out 24/7. So we do see people parking places, and there may not be a civil enforcement officer there at the time. Where there are hotspots, please report it, because as you say, we will then make that a hotspot, and we'll go and check. There are sort of limitations in terms of enforcement where cars parked on double yellow lines. We can't instantly put a ticket on it. There has to be an observation time and things. We have to be compliant with the law in the way that we're issuing them, so that we're issuing robustly, and therefore they can't be appealed and then quashed as a result of that. So but we're certainly issuing as the numbers in the report suggest. You mentioned about recycling, and of course we're on week 2 of the new regime for the simpler recycling, which is affecting a third of Thanet residents, so 27,000 properties. It is going to take time for everyone to take part in it, as we would like them to, but obviously the objectives of this is to increase our recycling rate, and this gives us the ability to collect food waste weekly and to collect recycling from that third of residents who didn't have curbside collections before. It's all moving in the right direction, but it will take time to make it work for everyone. I think there's some points there, Councillor Wing, things like cost of fly tipping and things we can come back on, but we have a team, as you say, they work really hard, they're really dedicated to it, same as graffiti removal, but happy to come back on those sort of things. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think with the parking, I wasn't blaming us. I think there's a culture amongst residents that they know there's a culture of, I'm just going to park wherever I want and stuff everybody else, and that's the culture that I think exists.
Chris wants to come in on parking.
Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of cutting across committees here a little bit here, but I know some members of this committee are also on governance and audits, and car parking enforcement was audited not that long ago and got reasonable. There were only 4 recommendations. Follow-ups due. I'd be surprised actually if it doesn't move to substantial. The recommendations were pretty were more around are things on the website correct, etc., rather than on the ground operations. Just some of the things, the primary findings, giving rise to reasonable assurance opinion in this area are as follows. There's some really good stuff in here. Reconciliation routines are ongoing. Monitoring of income is carried out to ensure that income is accounted for correctly. Staff in the office deal initially with PCNs, but a contract in place with Imperial who deal with appeals and non-payment of PCNs right the way through to collection of monies. Considerable amount of work has been carried out to develop the in-house parking hub, which staff have access to and provides central point for reporting information, i.e. car park inspection reports, also provides guidance on day-to-day processes and functions that have been carried out. I mean, there's quite a few other bits in here that demonstrate that the service is working really well from a process and control perspective, which I think is what some of the issues are here. I would be surprised if it's not substantial. It'll be right on the edge of being substantial at the follow-up.
I'll just take one more, Councillor Davis, and then we move on.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of areas. It is vital that we stay on top of this recycling business. Most of Cliff's End isn't going over to the new system, and we've still got the red bags. And I'm sure everyone has seen, apart from the arson attack on the reed bed, the fact that somebody was running around the village setting fire to bins and red bags. In fact, and Councillor Rogers and I had been chasing this over the weekend because the residents are up in arms and the whole seafront and everything still had its red bags out. And they obviously are the source of more detritus than most things, because the cardboard can blow around if it gets out of the bag as well, or cardboard and paper products. I'm interested at Councillor Wing's comment about people not knowing what to do, because I live in an area with seagull bags, and we had an excellent letter through the post probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, warning us of the upcoming changes. We then had our bins delivered on time in plenty of notice with a very explanatory leaflet inside, both of which said, and on the website it said, one week put your black bag in for the non-recycling, the following week put your clear bag. It isn't rocket science. So why people are incapable of working out that you put the bag in the seagull bag is beyond me. I've got 2 genius neighbours that managed to put theirs out a week in advance and not in the black bag. So they're sitting on Camden Square cluttering it up. Same people, by the way, that worry about cars and so on. Yeah? If they didn't receive it, different story. But if they didn't receive it, they won't have the bags to put out wrong, will they? So it's not an issue. However, what is a massive issue is this business of enforcement in the evening, and it seems to be spreading. We were fortunate enough to take you guys down there a couple of weeks ago onto the Western Undercliff, which is becoming more like shanty town on a daily basis. I could take you, if you give me a ticket machine, I'll happily go down there tonight and write out a minimum, even if they pay them off within 14 days, £600 worth of revenue, because it's sitting there. In addition to that, there's the unregistered caravans and things, which I understand pose a slightly different legal problem and obviously but it's there. And there's a clear sign at the end of the parking bay saying no overnight parking for campers, because the excuse we got before for it not being enforced was that they'd nicked the signs. Well, the signs have been replaced. Why is nobody going down there? And as Councillor Wing said, one of those vehicles has been there over a year. They were having a party down there the other night with 2 or 3 of them with a massive fire. You can't, and if KCC went down to clean up, because where all the detritus, sand and grit and everything and stones has come up on the road, you can't get along there to clean the verges or anything either. These people need to be moved, because some of the vehicles, I doubt they'll probably fall apart if you tried to move them. That's the Western Undercliff, where somebody, very slowly, admittedly, but is eventually investing in some flats with a cafe and toilets at the bottom to look after all those people that use that beach. And it's starting to become very undesirable a place to be, rather than the natural haven that it actually is. So could we please, whatever their hours and whenever they do it, one evening after 6 o'clock, send the enforcement team down there, because there's a load of revenue there apart from anything else. And if that's what these people need, because let me tell you, given that they can't tax and MOT their vehicles, I'm damn sure that they're not going to pay the fine. So therefore, we'll have even more to collect. Thank you.
You indicated, Councillor Curry.
Thanks for the report, Hannah. There's lots of promising data in there. I'd just like to sort of talk about a couple of positives, not for people that have got fixed penalty notices, but in Cliftonville West, we are getting people that are being ticketed that are parking illegally, and also the graffiti removals have been noticed by us and by residents. What I didn't quite notice was the number of enforcement actions for fly tipping. It surprised me, the numbers, and I think this would surprise resident groups as well. So what I'd just say is that if these enforcement actions are taking place, could we communicate these to the public? Because I think a lot of people don't think that the fly tipping enforcement ever happens, But we know that the fly tipping is being collected. But if there are enforcement actions, could we communicate these to the public? And because that's what stops fly tipping, if people think they will get caught and fined. So I think this is something we could definitely look into. Thanks.
Anybody else? We're done. Okay, thank you. If there's no recommendations arising, can the panel note the report? Thank you, Hannah. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is the Thanet Regeneration Programme update. Louise, to introduce the report.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm presenting our regular programme-wide update on the projects in Margate and Ramsgate that form part of the Thanet Regeneration Programme. This report was presented to Cabinet on the 19th of March and is for the panel to consider any recommendations you may wish to make to Cabinet. The information provided in the report includes a project-by-project overview of the schemes with high-level timelines for each project at Annex 1 and a financial update for the programme in Annex 2. This helps to show where the funding has been spent and what is remaining to deliver the projects. The project and programme managers continue to engage with stakeholders, provide project updates on the website and send out regular update newsletters. Some key project updates include the news that we have engaged a contractor for the design and build of the Margate Skate Park, and on Thursday we have an engagement event at the North Down Road Family Hub. The Newington project has reached practical completion and has been handed back to the Newington Community Centre Association, who we intend to continue to work with to support their long-term sustainability. We are working with a local organisation to put together a business event for the Green Campus. We have interest from existing local businesses and we are developing a programme for the event that will interest businesses, operators and tenants. The team have restarted the work to engage a contractor and they are finalising the brief to engage a third-party operator. As discussed here previously, due to local government reorganisation, the decision has been taken to bring in a third party to manage the site and engage tenants. The marketing process for the Clockhouse Cafe has been published and despite unveiling many unforeseen challenges, the works at the Clockhouse project continue through its refurbishment. We have held engagement events to help inform what residents of Ramsgate would like to see in the building. We have a number of schemes with applications submitted for planning and listed building consent decisions, including following its planning approval recently, the procurement exercise for the Walpole Bay beach facilities has been published. The Margate Creative Land Trust has been engaging with inward investors and local businesses who are looking to expand for their Harold Road site, and they are working on their asset management strategy for their Grosvenor Place site. Engagement events have been hosted at the Theatre Royal, and Westwood One also held an event at the Margate Digital Campus. Both of these events demonstrated a large amount of public support for those projects. We understand that members of the Ramsgate community remain concerned about the impact of removing the highway scheme, and officers have agreed to review budgets as the construction costs for the Green Campus, Pier Yard and Broad Street come in to understand the availability of the contingency funds. These are important projects for Ramsgate, helping to create jobs and improve footfall and the public realm. There would also be a significant impact to the council's finances if any further projects are cancelled due to the abortive costs involved. We remain committed to providing updates to help keep people informed and bringing reports such as these through to Cabinet and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Please let me know if you've got any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Hands up over there. I'll come to David Green first.
Yeah, what an enormous programme this is. I mean, as somebody who's just trying to manage one regeneration project for the town council, I'm really impressed by how much work is going on. And it's not surprising to me that this could turn really sour on us. Because it's beginning to look as though aborting projects is almost as costly to us as producing the outcome that we want. Unless we can cut some of the costs of some of the projects going forward, which will then mean that they're not as good, not as impressive as they perhaps originally were intended to be. So I don't envy officers in what they're trying to do here. It's really difficult. I don't know whether Chris can comment on the dilemma that we've got around this this problem. Also, I'm pleased that the likely recurrent costs of running some of these projects in years going forward is beginning to be flagged up and recognised, because I've been banging on about that for a couple of years now. So yeah, I'm impressed by what's happening, but I'm also worried about what could happen in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. I think, as you described it, it's a balancing act. It is really, really difficult. As I set out in my comments, there's some schemes where if we were to abort them, you could be looking at sort of 20% of our general fund balances in aborted costs, which would put us in a really difficult position. And in which case, Cabinet would really have to take, and Council potentially, because you'd have to increase the budget, a nuanced decision around whether it's in our interest to actually borrow more and spread the costs rather than taking a direct hit to our general fund reserves. However, the sort of potential fly in the ointment is all things local government reorganisation, and when we get into the realms of shadow councils and joint committees and the like, as to whether they would also be willing to sign off that expenditure. So it's it's a real balancing act, but there is there are contingencies in the project, and there are processes in place which I'm sure Louise and Bob will want to speak to in terms of how those risks are being managed at a scheme and a programme wide level. But yeah, the risk is real in terms of, if from an aborted cost perspective, in terms of what that could do to our general fund balances.
So I guess there's a couple of points just to follow on to say that at the moment all of the projects are within the overall funding envelope, and having tested the market, and we've had this discussion at this meeting in Cabinet on the procurement exercise that we brought back and have amended. We've tested the market, and we are confident that all of those projects are deliverable within that funding envelope. So I think the point about abortive costs is to make sure that both councillors and members of the public understand the decision-making framework that we sit within, and that information being published within these reports. But also that we have a rigorous project management framework within which the team are reporting on internally. So we are taking regular reports, we are submitting monthly highlight reports on the schemes. So we are being kind of checked and challenged on a monthly basis to ensure that we are remaining on track for our scheme deliveries. I think the last thing to say is about bringing in third-party organisations to manage all of the assets. I think previous to local government reorganisation, we were considering how the council might be the operator and just bringing in relevant staff. But on the basis of wanting to make sure that we secure those sites for the longer term and also hand over some of that kind of management risk to a third party, that's the approach we were taking, and relates back to a previous Cabinet report that set the direction of travel for each of the regeneration projects. Thanks.
Just on the highway scheme, I mean, it now looks as though KCC's demands aren't quite as onerous as perhaps we were told originally. And so we could avoid the penalty of aborting that scheme and produce it, well within the original budget, at least produce something well within the original budget.
I think the point, we've talked about that previously, haven't we, at this meeting? We would need to test all of that with KCC in a more formal way. And as we've said in a previous report, once we've got the construction costs for those three schemes, the Green Campus, Pier Yard and Broad Street, we will be in a position to understand what the contingency for the programme looks like. And we committed to revisiting the highway scheme, those elements of it that I understand you've heard from officers at KCC that would be deliverable. We would need to go back through a formal process with them and understand what those approvals would look like and what the parameters are that we were advised were impacted previously through the tunnel closure. But we have committed to revisit that.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Louise. It's really encouraging to see so many things starting to happen, things starting to open. So obviously one of my questions is, when do councillors get to go and have a look at Newington and Margate Digital and so on? I can only echo what David's saying about the highway scheme. You know that we're really concerned about the impact of that on Ramsgate if it doesn't come through, and we need to be maximising the parts of it that we can deliver in whatever way we can. And I do know that you're aware of that and that you're on with that, and we would be grateful to be kept in the loop of any discussions around that. Other than that, yes, obviously I share David's concerns about the scope of it, the huge size of it, and the implications if something fails. But it's really good to have the presentation as it is, and to be able to see each project separately and how they link, and how the dates and so on are working out. And yep, really encouraging, very positive. Pleased to see it. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And it is good to see. I sort of walk past Pier Yard most days, and it's good to see the scaffolding coming down. I did hear a rumour that the clock's not going to be refurbished, and that would be a shame because it is the clock tower, and that slight, the Greenwich Mean Time, 5 minutes, is it 42 seconds, is part of the heritage of the building. So I hopefully that can be looked at, and if we can, I don't know, try and find, maybe apply for some more grants to get the clock done. But it is good to see things going. I think Pier Yard is crucial to that building's success and the cafe's success. I'd like to ask the question, has the highways money been temporarily put into part of the contingency? And that, we met with the KCC officer that said anything from the roundabout upward is still feasible. It doesn't impact on the health and safety issue that is there. And then we had the width restriction thrown in. So Paul Valack is always really prompt at coming back to us. And I think there is a new width restriction, but it's in the tunnel purely and only in the tunnel. So any vehicle over, I think 3.7 has now got to contact KCC and get permission to go through there because of that incident that happened, which begs the question about the whole health and safety of the tunnel going forward anyway. Pier Yard, the only other thing I'd also ask is I think good idea to have third-party operators to guarantee the future of the projects, the cafe, the one by the car park. Are we offering them some sort of rent incentive to get established and keep going? And the other thing I'd maybe a bit of a spanner in the works is that the ongoing conflict in the US and Iran is bound to have an impact purely on fuel costs, one of the things we're seeing, but also probably on the cost of materials going forward. Do we see costs rising because of that ongoing conflict that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, sadly? So, yeah.
Thank you. The clock is a challenge, and we have had a number of conversations with Historic England, including we've submitted one kind of outline application, and we're working with them on that. So we are doing that, definitely. So in terms of the conversations you've had with KCC, as I said, if we were to revisit that highways scheme, we would need to really properly understand the formal decision making, because I think we have slightly different understanding from different members of that organisation around where the parameters are for the impact, the kind of revenue impact of having someone on site should the tunnel be closed, and that impact on the council. So it is something that we would need to look at once we're in a position with the other costs for the other schemes. So working with third-party operators, the approach that we are taking is quite an open one. We're sending prospectuses out to the market and asking businesses to tell us how they would deliver the site, what their view is on rent, whether they need any rent relief periods for fit out, that kind of thing. And then they will be judged against each other. So each one will be slightly different depending on what the site is, but we are taking a flexible approach to understand how they will deliver the outputs that we're required to deliver. So, for example, the cafe at the Clock House is particularly about providing sustainability to the Clock House, and that's about bringing in an income. Other ones might be more around making sure the jobs are being created, that there's skills, training, that kind of activity on the site. So each one will be different, but definitely it's part of the prospectuses. And the macroeconomic impacts is something that the team are talking about, and we are planning a meeting with our cost consultants to understand what they are seeing in the marketplace and the impact that may have locally.
I mean, I think, as Councillor Green said, you've got so many things to develop. Do you think with hindsight, I mean, it's great that it's absolutely fabulous that we got the money, but with hindsight, is there any review of trying to do something as expansive as over two fairly large towns with so many projects in so many locations? I mean, with what is effectively a very small officer team, it must be incredibly stressful.
I think the only thing about hindsight is we probably would have employed more people sooner. And we, as an organisation, we're in a completely different place to where we were when we started out on this journey, and I guess nobody can question the ambition.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Louise. I certainly don't envy you this task. I mean, we all know the history of this, that a lot of these projects had to be put together with a degree of haste, and I think we're paying the price for that now. But I'm just really concerned. I echo Councillor Green's concern that we're kind of heading for a bit of a Titanic moment on this. If we miss, if we don't get the projects delivered and we have the funding penalties, it would be catastrophic. And that doesn't mean to denigrate the work that you and your team are doing. Even the Titanic, there was a lot of good work being done on the Titanic right up until it hit the iceberg. But the risk of not getting these projects delivered is far too great to even contemplate. So I'm hopeful that Cabinet will look at a redesign, even as a contingency, a redesign of the projects where there's a danger of us not being able to deliver them on time, with viable start dates actually ready to go, so that because it seems that we seem to be designing, redesigning and redesigning, and not actually breaking ground and getting on with the work. And I know there are a lot of other factors at play here, but I think we do need to basically put something, make sure we've got a start date on all of these projects, and have an action plan for each of them if there looks like there's going to be slippage on that. And in order to get those start dates where there are at-risk projects, to have a redesign of them to make sure that they are deliverable. And I'm also concerned that we may not have confirmed operators or tenants for some of them. And again, to urgently look at the redesign of that in consultation with the market to see what the market actually wants. We heard so many times with the commercial port that an operator was imminent and that there were loads of people queuing up to operate ferries out the port, and any day now that we would have a tenant for it or an operator. So I'm really skeptical. If there is a proven market for something, where's the commitment to proceed? Where are the heads of terms agreements? And without that, can we afford to trust that we're not going to end up with just white elephants that require security? We'll end up with the depots at Piermont Park, where we're having to pay to maintain it, pay to secure it, and it's not producing any revenue for us. So that's another concern. So I think overall, I just hope that Cabinet will look at having a contingency plan, so that if these projects look like they're not deliverable, or there's a risk of that we have a contingency to deliver something that fits within the funding criteria, so that we don't end up being hammered with with the penalties of having to pick up all the very considerable design costs that have been incurred to date. So yeah, that's the main points, I suppose. Firstly, to look at the actual demand for these and consider urgent redesign if the demand simply isn't there, rather than run the risk of a white elephant, and making sure that whatever happens, we deliver something that ticks all the boxes, so that we don't end up with financial penalties for failing to produce them. Thank you.
So unlike the Titanic, we know where the icebergs are and we are avoiding them. All of the projects have got project plans and knowing each element, the things that we need to do. As I said, and as it says through I appreciate there's a lot of information in there on each of the projects, but there is a full programme around when we're going out to the market for construction. And as I said, Green Campus is due to go out. We're expecting by the summer to have returns for that. We're using a third-party organisation to support the procurement for the Green Campus and a couple of the other sites, just to help deal with some of that internal capacity. We've tested the market in terms of construction costs particularly around the Green Campus, but we've also tested the market around interest from operators. So we've done a number, in fact, of prior information notices where we've gone out and asked the market about their interest on certain sites, particularly the ones that are a bit more interesting, not necessarily the cafes so much, because we know that there'll be interest in those from the area that we are. I would say that the design and management costs are all well within the expected percentages that you would add to construction projects, and that's set out in previous versions of this report, and none of them kind of hit over that. It looks like a lot of money, but some of these schemes are multi-million-pound projects. So when you're talking about the percentages that you would necessarily expect for design fees, they tend to be big sums of money. And we also are looking at, well, if we can't identify an operator through that process, what are the other opportunities? So we are testing different mechanisms. So as I said, we know where the icebergs are. We are planning around those to make sure that the schemes are deliverable, and those touch points internally with Project Delivery Board helps us check and challenge at each of those stages. So I think you'll start to see over the next coming months those procurements, final procurement exercises all going out, and also those activities to engage third-party operators. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Could you just clarify, do we actually have start dates for every single project now then? With contractors, do we know when we're going to actually physically start the work on all of these projects is the question, I suppose.
We can't do that until we have contractors. So, as I said, we've got the Green Campus is due to go out shortly, and then that will be followed by Broad Street and Pier Yard. We've got contractors for the skate park, and they're starting their engagement process. We've got a design review panel for the project in the next couple of weeks, with shortly after that submissions to planning. So there are lots of milestones before a final, this is the start date. We can't say that. We've learned from that of trying to stay particular start dates until we have all the contractors on board. And the previous report that came to Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny addressed that, particularly for some of the Ramsgate projects. Oh, and the other thing to say is we are working up the final procurement documents and for the Theatre Royal, and that has gone in for planning and listed building consent. And we are finalising an engagement with a property organisation to promote it out to the marketplace. But we also have a very long list of organisations that responded to our prior information notice identifying interest in running the theatre.
Thank you. Is there a date that you could give us when you would expect to have all of the contractors identified and the timescales for construction completely finalised? When can we expect to have that? All of that information with definitive start dates with the contractors ready, all lined up and under contract.
I expect that'll be the autumn of this year. But each of the projects in the report that we've sent has a timeline and talks about expected planning, construction, and that all sits in there. So you'll be able to see more detail within the report.
Councillor Crittenden.
Thank you. It seems more than a little ironic that we're in this position because we were considered very poor and we needed levelling up and whatever the other phrases are that have come in since then. And that we're now talking about, do we take out a loan or pay fines? And it's more than a little ironic. And I appreciate that we're in this position because, as has already been said, when those applications had to be put in, it had to be done at very short notice, and it wasn't at all easy. And we've since faced various ups and downs in the world, some of those icebergs or whatever. We may have mapped the icebergs, but we still don't know where the Iranian storms are going to come in or not. but I think my concern comes back to what Chris Blundell was saying. So I mentioned your name, so you suddenly look up. And that really is how much. I know you have to do the red, amber, green risk assessments for GNA, and I'm just wondering where we're at on those red, amber, green risk assessments that you will be putting as part of your reports for GNA as a result of the situation we are in with the mapped icebergs, but other stuff that we simply don't know about, because it isn't sounding very good from what you said earlier.
Is that coming through okay? Yep. So in terms of the governance and audit report, there's a report going to committee next week. Charles has just published it this evening. And Louise has touched on this already. So there's risk management processes in place for each individual scheme, and we do need to report that, and we have to report that separately to MHCLG as well. There's a number of risks in the financial report that relate to this type of issue. The first one is in relation to, which is the highest scoring risk as 16, is financial sustainability. And this is one that could trigger, this is a particular issue that could trigger that risk to manifest. There's a second slightly lower scoring risk, and I think Councillor Wing touched on this actually, around the wider economic environment that could cause cost pressures, and it does reference that. I believe that one scored as a 12. So they're both red, they're both at the top. So in terms of that individual report, that's how those risks related to the scheme are drawn out in the corporate risk management report. But there are also separate, more granular, detailed program or project by project risk that we look to try and manage them as well. So we're not just looking at a global risk. That is almost, if the worst comes to pass, and that's what you need to do is plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we are considering that as a possibility. But there are mitigation strategies in place, as Louise has already talked about, the amount of contingency that is in place to address particularly, overruns that could occur for particular schemes. But we're in a really difficult position, and I think, as when I answered Councillor Green earlier on, that we may be in a position where it's more beneficial to take out a loan because you can spread that over a much longer time. But you've still got to assess that in terms of the value for money that would present, and it's got to be sustainable and affordable. But yeah, it's I would be doing a disservice if I was not say it's not one of the risks that's right at the top of my worry list in terms of whether it could cause issues for the council, not necessarily because of the likelihood, but because of the impact. We're in a position now where our reserves are relatively low, and we're looking at risks through a different lens. It's not necessarily whether they're likely to come to pass, but anything of this sort of scale, if it does come to pass, would be really, really damaging. So we've got to be really, really proactive in terms of managing those risks.
And I'll maybe put you on the spot here, but how confident are you that you would be able to, bearing in mind that we have to have permission because of LGR with other bodies to get loans, how confident are you, do you think, with getting a loan versus being turned down by that? It's not just our decision anymore as we get closer and closer to LGR.
In terms of actually getting the loan from PWLB, I have no concerns at all. We've got access to that, and they would say it's an adequate and appropriate use to say that. I don't want to sort of get drawn into that, because ultimately that could become particularly when you're talking about shadow councils and joint committees, that could be a political as much as an operational decision. I don't think it's fair for me to comment on that, where I'd be really that's conjecture as to what may or may not be in terms of certain circumstances in the future. At the moment, I'm really grateful, I think, to dial it back and come back to where we are. If you look at my comments there, I'm really, really sort of pleased and assured. If you look at the forecast at the moment, They're all on track and on budget, and that's where we are at the moment. So I don't want to scaremonger. This is the risk. So at the moment, well, I'm not saying this is going to happen, because if you look at the forecast, it says it's going to be delivered. And I think we need to focus on that as a key message. But there is a risk, and if we're in a situation where not so much projects overrunning, I think the point that Louise was getting at, if councillors start to decide that we want to change schemes or abort schemes, or it's not a good idea to do X, Y, or Z, if a scheme's aborted because of that, we've got no room to manoeuvre at that time. The programme that we've got is a programme we have to deliver. Now, we have to deliver these schemes. The time to sort of vary and change these schemes is gone.
Thank you. You skirted around the opinion slightly, which I expected of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't blame you in the slightest.
Councillor Davis.
Probably the mindset of mine is to say I'm hopeful yet not confident, because we are in a parlous situation, and it's partly because of swapping horses, not midstream, mid-channel, with the ferries that didn't exist, for example. We have squandered money, and this has been going on now for, 4 years, 5 years? And they're not penalties, Councillor Manners, they're money that we've already done. We've done the dough. So if we don't deliver on these projects, every single one of them, the cost that we have incurred to get to date comes out of our reserves and not out of the levelling up money. That was never made clear from the outset, which it should have been, because it might stop people following fantasy ferries and squandering money on lunacy that was never going to happen. However, we are where we are, so I want to carry through and hopefully finish on a positive. But part of this, here we are now, we're hearing about the clock tower, that the clock doesn't work or there's something wrong with it. That building has had more surveyors, architects, engineers. It's been one sign after another for the last decade up in the window there. And yet, it had to have emergency repairs on the actual parapet of the tower itself, which Historic England stepped in with emergency funding for about 4 years ago. Did nobody at any time think we'd better check the actual mechanism of the clock? What are these people being paid for? We're told we're in a parlous situation. I see thousands, if not millions of pounds being spent, and now we decide at the last minute, there's a problem with the actual reason for the building being there. Who's holding these people to account? Because they're all riding off into the sunset, having done their bit of consulting, and it's madness, utter madness. Now, also, we were told that the reason the Ramsgate Society and others had been sort of dismissed, if you like, from discussions on operating the museum, bearing in mind they are the civic society for the town, was because the council had employed a museum specialist who was doing such a great job, blah, blah, blah. So why have, and I'm reading from the report, have officers appointed Hayley Sharp to develop the vision for the museum and interpretation? The consultants are running various engagement activities. If we've got our own in-house museum specialist, should they not be running this? Why are we paying third parties when we've already got the noose round the council's neck and we're hoping that the wood isn't rotten underneath us? Because that's the reality of this. Our reserves have been hammered and run into the ground by this administration, and they're as parlous as they were when UKIP failed and collapsed running the council. So we're back in the same position because of political stupidity, but here we are with as I say, a very vulnerable situation, and I'm reading this report, we'll pay some more consultants for their opinion. When do we start delivering? The independent monitoring officer said there was too much of this, and we're just not adhering to the advice that it's like la la la. No, we'll probably start looking for ferries next week and sending out soft marketing exercises or some such. So let's be straight about this. But I think the real questions on this are going to have to be asked at governance and audit, because we are where we are, and this has to be delivered, whether it makes any sense or not. However, to finish on a little more positive note, I am pleased to see that we seem to now be going back to actually providing something for the fishing fleet, which we were told was a declining industry. The reality, we've gone from 7 vessels to 17. We haven't heard much about the canning plant, which was going to open in about clearly isn't, but, we'll come back on that one on a different discussion. However, we are finally supporting the fishermen because, 7 boats to 17 is not a declining fleet. Interest from international companies to use the area for fish processing is not a declining industry. So let's have some straight talk here. Let's get delivering on this, but I am putting on record our very real concerns about the situation this council's been put into by basically chit-chat, waffle, changing direction. Oh, we go over here now we're going that way. Let's set a direction and go and actually deliver.
Right. Not sure if there's any questions there. Anybody else? Are we done? Yes.
I'm happy to.
You're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the ones that I identified as questions.
Go on then.
So we did know that the clock wasn't working, and that has always been part of assessing third-party funding, particularly discussions with Historic England, as I said previously. Part of the challenge is actually some of the issues that have been uncovered as we've been working through the construction of the site, which is not unexpected in a Grade 2 star listed building, also at risk, having been had very little maintenance over the previous tenants being on site. So we are identifying the options that we have got to be able to solve the problems that we are finding. Our museum manager is one person and is looking after a number of different sites and archives and assets within our museum portfolio. He is not employed to set a vision and necessarily work on short-term projects such as engaging with residents to identify what it is they want to see. It was a relatively small commission. They've done a really great piece of work. They were in the markets in the High Street. They were at Westwood Cross, and they've done an awful lot of work to help make sure that what we have in the clock house is right for the people of Ramsgate. Quite often museums will just put anything in, and the story doesn't necessarily tell that of the place. So it's a really good piece of work, and I'm looking forward to being able to put the work into place. And we are also delivering. We have got projects on site and we are delivering those schemes. And we have always been talking about delivering a facility for the fishing fleet, and we have started those conversations again with the team. We've been on site with them, and they have been through the most recent designs, and we are moving that forward.
Excellent. Okay, so there's no specific recommendations. We are asked to note the report. Excellent, thank you. Okay, moving on. Thanks, Louise. Okay, item 8, which is the housing assistant policy. Sitting quietly, Ashley, over there.
Thanks. This report to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel seeks comments for a revised draft of the housing assistance policy, which was originally adopted in October 2025. This proposal includes provisions for public realm enhancement, slight changes to our existing owner-occupier loan, and to introduce a top-up scheme for the no-use empty loans funded by KCC. The proposed amendments, particularly the public realm enhancements, are intended to improve residents' quality of life and support independent living, potentially reducing the demand for the disabled facilities grants. The addition of the top-ups to the no-use empty loans from KCC aim to increase the number of long-term empty homes return to use in the district. The report recommends approving the consultation draft of the policy, conducting a 6 weeks public consultation on the changes, and giving delegated authority for minor post-consultation amendments to myself in consultation with the portfolio holder for housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Members, any comments? Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ashley, very much. Yeah, I very much support these changes. I think they're beneficial, all of them, but particularly looking at the top-up empty homes grant. I don't really understand how this is going to work. So the loan is through KCC, the original loan, and we offer a top-up. if there is money available, does that mean the money that we've received back in payments? Right. So how is this communicated to the applicant, if you see what I mean? How do they know when they can apply for a top-up or when they can't?
Sorry, when this is approved, then we will run a campaign. So the no-use empty loan that we're talking about, we're top-upping up, is run by KCC. So they will promote our top-up if it's needed. They will offer it. They do the marketing of it.
Okay. Fine. But does that mean that not everybody will be able to have it? Yeah.
No, they can apply for it if it's needed. So you're not automatically going to get it. You're only going to get it if the work's identified as being more expensive than the no-use empty loan from KCC. So I think it's 25,000 that they commit. If they go and they see that the works, or they've got proof that the works are going to be a lot more, they're going to be 50,000, then they could apply to us for the additional 25. Or it could be the works are only going to be £5,000, so they could apply to us for the additional £5,000. So it's just the top up really, because I think the cost of works to bring empty homes back has gone up so much. You probably can't really get a lot with 25,000. So that's why we've put this money in for the recycled monies to top up the KCC pot. But that is recyclable.
That's great. I think, because although it's a relatively small amount of money, could make all the difference and make a project much more viable. Thank you very much.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks. It is really good as a scheme because obviously it can make the difference and it can make something viable that isn't. Is this money coming where we're topping it up? We've got no yield on that money whatsoever. So are we committing up to 25 grand for 10 years without any comeback on that? Because there's no payment during the period, I understand. It's repayable at the end of the term, yeah? So whilst it's a good idea, given that KCC haven't increased their amount on it since 2008, so we got, what's that, 18 years. Given that all we hear about, especially from KCC, is increased costs and inflation and everything else, should we not also be hammering them to increase it to the equivalent indexed amount? Because that would be a good use of our resources, in my opinion, rather than us just chucking money out there on a 10-year term, which obviously, it'll come back, we hope, but there's a cost to that.
I was just going to say, Bob's going to come in, but I'm not sure we can actually do that. I mean, I think, obviously, we all know KCC are limited with their funds and they potentially haven't got the money. But we are the only authority in Kent that do the owner-occupier loans. So we do something a little bit extra than anyone else does. So we do our own occupier loan where, we give it to, we've got this available for long-term empty properties that people are going to live in. So the no-use empty loan is for people to rent out or sell on. Our loan is for people to live in it. And we're the only authority in Kent that do that. KCC don't promote that quite so much.
No, thanks. And this is interesting because the KCC no use empty, it does have to be empty to get it, doesn't it? You can't use it to keep something livable, whereas we can give people improvement grants to keep something livable, yeah?
Well, ours has got to be a long-term empty property for at least 6 months, but you can live in it for the 6 months, but after that time you can't. So you can, because what we found were people were buying empty properties, and obviously because of the market today, people are having to live in them and like live in a room and then do the rest of it up. So we're now allowing people to do that, but for 6 months only. So, because that was a problem, they were buying these properties, moving in, and then applying to us for a loan, and we're like, I'm really sorry, you can't do it because you've already moved in. As long as it's a long-term empty property for 6 months, then they are eligible for our loan.
And they can move in there on a temporary basis, but if they've got a 2-year refurbishment, they've got to get out.
Yeah, it's got to be 6 months.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Green.
Doesn't the amount in the pot automatically increase because of the interests on the loans?
Yeah, our loans are interest free, so there is no repairs are interest-free as well.
Okay, so the recommendations are the ones that are in the report and they're laid out by Ashley. Do you want me to read them all out? You all okay with them? Any further recommendations? Okay, so do we have a proposer for those recommendations? Councillor Wilson, the seconder, Councillor Green, and do we all agree? Perfect, thank you, Ashley. Moving on to item 9, which is forward plan exempt cabinet reports list. Unless there's something from the plan that the panel wish to consider, then members are asked to note that report. Excellent, and that concludes tonight's business, and I declare this meeting closed at 9:32. Thank you.